Not everything your brain tells you is a fact. Did you know that 80% of the thoughts you have are innately negative? Our brains are developing negative thoughts and perspectives on our experiences. Without learning to reframe our thoughts, it may be difficult to distinguish thought from fact and even feel impossible to unlearn the lies our brain has told us. Welcome to Normalize the Conversation. I'm your host, Francesca Reicherter, and today I'm joined by speaker, author, mental health advocate, and founder of Speaks to Inspire, the mental health solution for young adults suffering in silence, Abraham Sculley. Join us as Abraham bravely shares his own mental health journey by opening the conversation with others and teaching us how to unlearn the lies our brain has told us. Abraham, thank you so much for joining me for today's conversation. I am really excited for our audience to learn more about you and your story. But before we dive in, I really just want to check in with you. How are you really?
Such a great question. I'm glad you started there. Today, I am doing okay. I have experienced a bit of a relapse with depression. And so over the last few months, I've really been struggling mentally. It's been difficult to do the things that I need to do. Still in recovery. I'm still working through treatment. And today I got up and was feeling better, which is a really big win for me. Because if you would have asked me yesterday, I would have said it's rough and I'm not doing well. So today I'm doing okay, and I'm happy to be here in this conversation with you.
Thank you for being so honest and vulnerable. I know those depression kind of spells can be so overwhelming. For me, I recently went through one as well. I don't know if it's like the winter months or it's just like the stress of the holiday season, or if it's just not taking care of myself very well all through the year and trying to put too much on my plate and it just hitting at once. But it's been a hard couple of months. A lot of crying, a lot of inability to get up. And when I heard you say, like, today you got up and you were feeling a little better, that to me sounds like and it's such an exciting moment because I
Mhm.
know I struggle to just get up and walk my dog. My grandma has to help me sometimes with that the past few months. So to see that you've gone through it, you're so honest and vulnerable talking about it, and you're getting through it and starting to get to the other side is amazing.
Yeah, thank you so much for saying that. And I think that's so key. It really started with your question, which is how are you doing really? And that's something that we can ask anyone around us, our loved ones, our friends, our family members. But then that question, it invites me to reflect and become aware of how I'm doing really versus the casual, hey, how you doing? Or what's good? Or, that quickly elicits a I'm good, I'm fine, everything's great. But just adding that, how are you doing really gives me a moment to pause and really reflect. So I think that's a great thing that you did. So I appreciate you for doing that. And that's something that I think that we can all incorporate in our conversations.
Yes, absolutely. How many times do you say, "How are you?" to someone and they just keep walking? Like, they don't even
Yeah.
take the time to respond, or they say, "I'm good, I'm fine," and don't ask back, or they ask back but keep walking away because they don't see it as a question. They see it as a
Yeah.
greeting. And after what we all went through with the pandemic, we all struggled together. We all really, really went through it.
Hmm.
We're living in a new world where it's okay to say, "I'm not okay." It's no longer how are you is no longer a greeting. It should no longer be seen as a greeting. So I love adding that really component and seeing how many people are willing to be honest and reflect with themselves. Because if you don't, you're trapping yourself. You're trapping yourself in this cycle where you kind of continue to struggle because you're not honest. You don't even realize that you're struggling. And if you can't admit how you're feeling, how can you work through it and get to the other side?
That's such a good point. And I think even for me, maybe a few years ago, 4 or 5 years ago, it wasn't that. I didn't want to be honest with how I was doing if someone would have asked me. It's that it was so habitual for me to just go on with life that I didn't even have the self awareness to know how I was doing. Because on the days when I wasn't doing well, I would tell myself and kind of push myself, well, I'm doing well, or, neglect the other feelings and emotions that I've had. But over the past few years, just learning through different tools and learning to prioritize my own mental health, I found journaling as a really good tool to help me with my self-awareness, because for a very long time I didn't know any other feelings or emotions other than mad and happy. That's it. Right. But through journaling now I can say, today I'm not doing well. I'm a little tired, or I'm feeling anxious, or some other emotion that I can resonate with, and then express it with someone else.
You are speaking my language. That was something for me, is finding that awareness and journaling how I'm feeling and what's happening, and admitting that, yeah, I have these great things happening for me. And like on the outside, it might seem really good, but I'm overwhelmed, or I'm just exhausted,
Mhm.
or I'm not taking enough time to focus on me and just caring for myself and loving for myself. I am doubting myself constantly. But without journaling and bringing awareness to the good and the bad, I just kind of punished myself and told myself, like, no, you're fine. You have to be fine. I'd wake up and I'd feel like you said, like this happy and sad and mad, like these emotions. And it was very surface level. And I'd be like, well, I have no right to be mad. I have no
Mm,
right to be sad. I need to be happy. Or
exactly.
something bad happened and I was like, I need to be sad. I need to be angry. And then I would smile or laugh or something. And I'd feel guilty for
Mm.
feeling that way. So having that awareness to have a space and range of emotions, no matter what's going on, really changed everything for me. I really love our conversation, but before we keep going, I really want people to learn more about you and your journey and how you got to where you are today. So, can you tell us a little bit more about you?
Of course. So today, I consider myself a mental health advocate. Wasn't always this way. For a very long time, I didn't even know what mental health was. I couldn't tell you the difference between mental health or mental illness. I kind of just thought mental health was synonymous to crazy. Just was, didn't have the knowledge. I grew up in a Jamaican household. I grew up in a Christian household as well. My parents were two immigrants from Jamaica who came to the United States in pursuit of the American dream, and there were a lot of experiences that we had and conversations that we had, but mental health wasn't one of those. So I kind of grew up in this environment where it wasn't safe to talk about feelings and emotions and talk about how to work through difficult emotions. So I learned really quickly how to mask those emotions and how to suppress them. And for me, it became habitual. Kind of fast forward a little bit. I graduated from high school in 2014 and decided to leave home and go to college. So I was a first generation college student. Was a really big deal for me because no one in my family had done it, and now I could kind of step out, this new adventure, but also create a path for my younger siblings. And that first year, although it was very exciting, and it was an opportunity for me to make new connections, to learn, to be away from family, to grow. It was also a very challenging time. And it was one of the first times where I really battled with my mental health. And again, not knowing what mental health was, I kind of just battled with it and tried to work through it the best way I knew how. And I did that for as long as I could until I couldn't. And I remember I went from being this very optimistic, student, very passionate about life, passionate about experiencing what college was like, to really isolating myself, feeling really down, overwhelmed with stress. During my first year, I had to work a full time job. I was a full time student. I was doing a lot of different things. And I started to withdraw. And I had the awareness enough to know that something was off or something was wrong, but I didn't know what it was. I didn't have a name for it. And I had a best friend of mine during that first year who really saw those signs, and she was bold enough to reach out to me, and we had a conversation. And similar to what you asked on, when we got started, she said, "Hey, Abe, how are you doing? I've noticed you haven't been on campus lately. You've been kind of out of it, even when you are around. You haven't been going to church. How are you doing?" And I danced around the conversation. I didn't know how to articulate what I was really feeling. And I felt a lot of shame about the way I was feeling, that I couldn't get out of bed, that I was isolating and withdrawing. But she was persistent, and she didn't give up, and she continued to show me that it was a safe space. And I finally opened up with her and told her that I wasn't eating, I wasn't sleeping, I had negative thoughts, and I was scared, and I wasn't motivated. And through sharing that, she invited me to seek professional help on my campus's counseling center. And that started this journey of being treated or diagnosed with clinical depression, being treated for depression, and then this ongoing journey of recovery for me. So that experience led me into this whole new world of mental health being a real thing, and mental health being as important as physical health. Whereas before, I didn't know what mental health was. So at this point, I'm like, wow, this is huge. I've experienced something so almost like traumatic for me. And I've got to do something with this. So I ended up changing my major from information technology to psychology. And I just started on this journey of what does it look like to speak up about, mental health, things like depression, anxiety, and create spaces for other young people like myself who feel like they're alone, who feel that shame, and who experience stigma, to know that there is help, there are resources, and they don't have to suffer in silence.
Abraham, your story, that just warms my heart to see how much you struggled and that journey of getting to where you are today and then wanting to use that to help others. There's not there's not enough conversation on mental health in general. And like you said, you just didn't know how to articulate how you were feeling, and growing up and feeling like you have to put that face on and that mask on. And getting to a place where someone asks you, and not only getting to that point where you can say it and be honest with them, but being honest with yourself and then wanting to teach others how to do that is incredible. But what was the hardest part of that journey for you?
Yeah, I think the most difficult part was treatment. Because if anyone is listening and you know anything or have your personal experience or know someone who has mental illness and is treated for any mental illness, you know that the process of finding the right treatment plan is difficult for many, and it was difficult for me. I started out during that process of identifying that I was struggling, that it was called depression, and that I could be treated for it. So I started taking medication for depression, and there was a lot of stigma around taking medication for depression. And I dealt with a lot of that stigma. I remember when my psychiatrist recommended that I start on medication because of how bad I was doing, I was like, I don't know if I want to do that, but I'm willing to try whatever I need to try to get better. But because of that stigma and because of that shame of taking medication for my mental health, I decided to come off of the medication. And I came off of the medication at a really high dosage, without the help of a professional, which is something that I would not recommend to anyone who is taking medication for any mental illness. Always seek support, professional support, if you need to change medication or would like to come off. But because of that shame and the stigma, I decided to come off, and I didn't want to take it any longer. I also felt like I was going through the ups and downs of, is this working? Is this not working? How long am I going to have to be on this? I don't want to be on this for the rest of my life. And when I did come off cold turkey, I spiraled out of control. I went from having the strong depressive symptoms of not sleeping, racing thoughts, to those multiplying by 10. And it led to me having suicidal thoughts. So it was at that point where I realized I could not do this by myself. I needed additional help, and I needed to commit to the process of supporting me and doing what I needed to do for me, because it was during that period where I was in college. And as I was spiraling, having these suicidal thoughts, I was fearful that I may act on these thoughts. And it led to me having to withdraw from school. So I left school and I was home, went back home I went to school in Pensacola, Florida, went back home to Miami, Florida. And just for listeners' context, is about 700 miles from each other. I didn't know Florida was that big until I moved all the way out north in Florida. But I went back home, and my main focus was prioritize your mental health, get better, do what you need to do to get better. And so that was the lowest point for me, because that was a time in my life where I considered, dying by my own hand. And I never thought that I would ever get to that point. And it also, although it was very, dark for me, it also gave me the ability to have empathy with those who do struggle with suicidal thoughts, because my mindset around that was I couldn't comprehend what it's like to want to kill yourself. But now I get it. I totally get it. So that was one of those dark times.
I really love how you brought up treatment and medication and how difficult it was to get to a place where it was okay to do that. The shame of medication, I actually don't think this is something I've ever talked about before, but
Mm,
when I was first discharged from the psych ward, I was given an antidepressant. I was given one while I was in there, and it sent me into a manic episode taking it. But when I withdrew from it and I was like, I'm not taking this anymore. I'd been taking it for X amount of time, and I just really spiraled. But it was
mm,
that shame of what would happen if someone found out that I was taking it. And then it didn't work well for me, so I couldn't take another one ever again. And it took me 2 years to admit that I needed medication and that was okay.
mm,
And still to this day, sometimes, like, my little pill bottles are hidden behind my vitamins
yeah,
because not that I have a problem saying I'm taking it and not that I have a problem, like, taking it, but that fear of someone walking into a room and not knowing, and then seeing the bottles and wondering what it's for is
yeah,
still, like, a little bit of shame that I deal with to this day.
yeah,
And I don't think that conversation is talked about enough, is that shame, that inner shame of what happens if someone finds out, and feeling like trying to find different little ways to sneak it so that you can do it and feel confident and comfortable with it without anyone else, like that dirty little secret.
yeah. That's such a good point. And I think the more we can share that and articulate that, those who are in the same position feel that it is okay. Because the truth is, it is. If we were looking at it as a physical health issue or physical illness, there is no shame about that. And we think about taking supplements to take care of our bodies. There is no shame about taking supplements. And honestly, when you shared that it took you 2 years, I was thinking, I was kind of laughing in my head. It took me just up until last month to be okay with being on medication for depression. And it's been a process. And the more I go through this journey of discovery for myself, prioritizing my mental health, having conversations like these, it exposes me to the continued work that I must commit to not only break down the shame and the stigma associated with mental illness, but also be a better me every single day, right? And be a healthier version of myself. So I definitely resonate with what you're sharing, and thank you for sharing that. I think it's so important for us to hear that.
Thank you, and congratulations to getting to that point. I mean, it's only been a month, and not only did you start taking the medication, admitting that it's okay, but you're talking about it already. And like you said, it's so important that we have these conversations because when we're not talking about it, we're allowing that shame to live, right?
Yeah.
And it's still so private. And maybe it's private for me and then private for you. And then it's someone else who's really barely hanging on, who feels so alone in it, so isolated, full of shame to not hear anyone else standing up and talking about it. So thank you for that. But how did you get to that point where you were ready to talk about it and so willing to be vulnerable with your mental health?
Well, you just encouraged me. And you see, that's literally how shame works. It's not that I don't think it's that the shame, or I guess there would be a difference between like shame and maybe like feeling guilt or feeling like maybe even some nervousness around speaking up about something, that it goes away. I don't know if it goes away, but I do know that we make a conscious decision to combat that. We make a conscious decision to fight back against that shame that exists and that many people experience. And so, to be honest with you, I haven't shared, I mean, besides like my immediate family, I haven't shared that. I mean, I haven't had an opportunity really, but I haven't shared that up until this conversation. I heard you mention it and it made me think, well, that's true for me as well. Like it took me years to be able to be okay with this is a part of what recovery looks like for me. And just like I take supplements, just like I go to the gym, just like I journal for my mental health, I read books, I'm constantly looking for ways to grow. This is another tool in my toolbox to help me to be a better version of myself. So I would say what got me to the position to share that is through this conversation. And the more we have conversations like this, the more we become liberated to be who we are. So just the simple fact that you shared it encouraged me to say, hey, I have a similar experience. I would like to share, not just with you, but with your listeners and whoever catches this conversation. And just like there's a ripple effect there, I can now be encouraged. Maybe, in another conversation that I have, I can share this because I was safe and comfortable sharing it with Fran, on that day. So to answer your question, it was just this conversation right here.
And that's the power of normalizing the conversation.
There we go. Boom. I
Quick
love
plug.
it. I love the plug.
But you said just having this conversation and hearing my disclosure now inspired you to disclose yourself. One thing you said that's so fascinating to me because I'm the complete opposite. The only people we've talked about it with is your family. For me, I'd rather speak publicly to anyone other than my family about my mental health and what I'm going through. I don't know why. I am an open book to anybody. And if my family asks me about it, I'll talk about it. But I do feel that little bit of shame with my family versus with other people. I feel so comfortable and free. So it sounds like it's kind of the opposite for you.
It wasn't always that way, especially during that first major depressive episode in college. I hid it from my parents like it was the worst thing ever. They had no idea. And I hid it for a few reasons. Number one, there was a lot of shame, a lot of stigma associated with an illness that you can't see. But then also, I realized very quickly that my family was not in a position to support me in the way that I needed to be supported. If I had no idea what mental health did or meant, and I come from a household where we didn't talk about these things, how could they support me not knowing, what the illness is? And that was my experience. Really, I had to find safe spaces outside of my immediate family and be able to share that until I kind of built up the courage really to talk to my family about it. So it's taken a long while for us to have certain conversations, and it has taken different experiences for us to be put in a position to talk about things as it relates to mental health. But it wasn't always I share with my family, and then I'm able to share with others. It's definitely been a journey.
And it really is a journey that changes constantly. And like you said, you grew up not talking about it. That's the reality for so many of us, that we grow up never talking about mental health, and our only exposure is in the movies, the
Yeah.
like insane asylum narrative,
Oh my gosh.
right? And then, so we grow up with that being our idea of what mental health is. And if I talk about it, that's where I'm going to end up. And I'm going to be kind of like chained to a bed and injected with a bunch of
Mm,
tranquilizers and taken away from my family, never see anybody ever again, and locked away. And there's this whole idea. And yes, there are some people who are put in restraints. There are some people
mhm,
who are injected with tranquilizers when needed. It is done
mhm.
100%. That's not the reality for everyone. It's not used very often. It's not used for every single person. It's used in very specific situations when someone really is a danger to themselves or someone else, and they just need to keep them safe. But without these conversations and having this very limited idea of it, it's terrifying to know who you can talk to. And I don't know about you, but for me, my biggest fear with my family was, what if it upsets them and then they don't want to talk to me, or they don't know how to respond, and then I upset them and put them in a situation where they don't know what to do, and now I don't know what to do, and it's just like this whole overwhelming mess where no
Mhm.
one knows what to do or what to say, and then we're kind of stuck in a stalemate of silence. I
Yeah,
actually write a script. To this day, I will be like, "This is what I want you to say.
I
Please
love it.
just say this."
I love it. And I resonate with that too, because one of the fears that I had was I'm literally 700 miles away from my family. And me sharing what I'm going through and the thoughts that I'm having and the fact that I don't know what's going on, but I know something is going on would probably, be scary for my parents. They wouldn't know what to do. They wouldn't be able to support me, visit me, or do any of that in that moment. So that was part of it. But another part was really knowing from past conversations and experiences how something like what I was experiencing was dealt with. And I remember when I finally, had the courage. It was either the courage or I was just tired of hiding it from my parents. Either one. I decided to open up, and I spoke to my dad about it. And it was after me being diagnosed with depression. And one of the first questions he asked me was, have I been praying lately? And I told him I've been struggling with praying. I don't have the words to say. uh, I don't I don't know what to pray about. And he asked me, have I been going to church? And my dad was giving me all of the tools that he knew, but even these tools carried some limitations as we're talking about a mental, illness, right? Because yes, 100% prayer is and has been and will always be a valuable tool and a helpful tool for me as it relates to um, taking care of my mental health and going to church, being in communities. But I also need to be in therapy, at times. I also need to take medication at times. I also need to journal and do different things that I use to help me and to allow me to be well. But my parents and family wasn't exposed to mental health in that way. And so they weren't able to provide those types of supports at the time.
I'm so glad you brought that up because I also grew up in a very Christian Catholic household, and that's the kind of the messaging, right? Is let go and let God. God will provide. Don't have anxiety. If you have anxiety, you're not trusting enough in God. Trust in
Mm,
God, and there will be no anxiety. There'll be nothing to stress about. And I'm a big believer in everything happens for a reason. I really am. However, the messaging that let go and God will provide everything really didn't work for me. And here's why. I grew up, for some reason, the first time I heard that, I was very, very young. I went to Catholic school and we had to read the Bible. And pray the rosary and go to confession. And I just remember being very young and hearing that and saying, but if I'm not working, God's not going to give me money. God's not going to just come down and hand me money to provide
Mm,
me shelter, right? Provide me food. So God's providing is not really everything. So if I don't have these tools and these resources, God can't save me. So with my mental health, this whole let go and your anxieties will go away. If I didn't have the tools and resources, God wasn't going to come down and stand in front of me and say, you're healed.
mm,
So that became very conflicting with my mental health as I got older, was figuring out how to pray and how to believe within what made sense to me and what I had internalized. And I became very angry. I stopped going to church completely. I stopped
mhm,
praying. I stopped believing for the longest time because I didn't, that was the messaging. The messaging was just let go and everything will be fine. And that wasn't, I mean, I tried to let go, but I
mm.
wasn't fine. I wasn't okay. I needed these tools and resources. And that wasn't the conversation I was getting. And I just think that's something that's really common for people who grow up in a very religious household is that you're taught based on religion how to get through. And there's, like you said, limitations, and that's okay. But I was never given that piece of the conversation.
Yeah, I'm so glad you shared that. And I'm sorry that was your experience. And it's the experience for so many people. The way that was helpful for me as I started to hear the messaging, like you call it, but also understand that, for me, and I believe for all, like God does provide. But what does it look like? Because as I think about the limitations are from like human beings, right? We have those limitations in terms of our understanding, our perception, and how we communicate those things. So one thing that was really helpful, because for me, faith plays a really big role in my life and will always. And my relationship with God, my creator, is like the most important thing for me. And I had to understand that God was in the midst of my suffering and my pain as well, that he didn't leave me. Although I felt abandoned, although I felt like I was suffering in silence, although I felt like I didn't have support from my family, I had to believe that no, God is still here. Like if no one else is here, God is here. And so I started searching the Bible, I started searching scriptures, and I found a scripture that says faith without works is dead. And really what that meant for me is that God does provide. I have to open my eyes to see what the provision looks like, because God provided that best friend who called me and was genuine and courageous enough to ask me how I'm doing. God provided the wisdom to that best friend to invite me to seek professional support. I just had to shift my lens to see, oh wow, that isn't just, because I also believe, like you said, everything happens for a reason. I don't think there are any coincidences. But that was what it looked like for God to support me in those moments. And when I read Faith Without Works is Dead, it helped me to realize, yes, having faith is important, knowing that God does provide, but also playing my part. And my part was doing the work that was necessary and that is necessary for my mental health. And they go together. So that's been something that I've carried with me, ever since experiencing depression in college, and it's been a very comforting experience, and also impactful in my growth and continued recovery.
You just blew my mind with the way you shifted that perspective. And that's what I love about these conversations, right? Is that I came from at it from a very different perspective. I'm a very literal person. And especially as a child, I had no understanding of critical thinking. It was you said something and that was exact. My teacher would
Mhm.
put his hand on the paper and just pointing to the paper and be like, "Oh, write your date on the paper." And I would write it exactly where his finger was. Even if
Yeah.
it was randomly in like the bottom corner of the
Yeah.
paper or like in the middle, I was so literal. I did exactly as what I saw or heard. And no one talked about it in that way, right? Providing outside. I looked at it like providing every single piece, but it's
Mm,
providing those tools, those resources. I was so
100%.
focused on I need these tools and resources and not looking at how God is providing those tools and resources, which I think really does make such an impact in how I can continue to rebuild my relationship. It's something that I've been slowly working on. My grandma and I actually the other day were talking about wanting to go to church again because I haven't gone in years. So this is really exciting for me. And I hope for people listening, giving them kind of a new perspective if they lost that perspective and were never able to find it. One thing I really want to shift to though is your book, Unlearn the Lies. How have we not talked about it yet? Yes, there you go. You got it.
Yeah. Yeah, very exciting project. Something that I didn't think I would do. But when the time was right, I knew it was something that I needed to do. Unlearn the Lies, a guide to reshaping the way we think about depression, came from the depths of depression that I was in while being a college student and suffering with the stigma. I call them lies, right? The lies that kept me suffering in silence. And I write about 7 specific lies that I continued to tell myself, ruminate on, and it created this hole that I couldn't come out of. And it wasn't until I learned that treatment recovery was necessary, until I learned that prioritizing my mental health was necessary, I was able to gain the tools to unlearn those lies and get the support that I needed. And it's such a valuable project for me, not only because it was my first book, but it was an opportunity for me to share everything, like be transparent, be vulnerable, because those who are dealing with any mental illness, but specifically depression, it's important that we know that we're not alone, because depression does lie and it says you're the only one going through this. No one understands. No one is going to help you. You're going to feel like this for the rest of your life. Depression has those types of lies. But when you can read from the experience of someone who was there, right, and can articulate it in a way where you can connect to their experience, it helps to reassure you that you're not alone. And so I take readers through this process of identifying what the lie is and then working through the process of unlearning those lies so that they can work towards prioritizing their mental health.
Wait, I love this. Where can I get a copy?
Yeah, so it's on Amazon. It's also on my website, abrahamsculley.com, and Sculley is spelled Sulley.
And if I get it from your website, can I get a signed copy?
You can. If you if you get it off of Amazon, unfortunately I won't be able to sign it. But if you do get it off of my website, you get a signed copy and a personal message from me to you.
I love that. It is so important that we have these conversations. It is so important that we talk about how the stigma has created all these lies that we've told ourselves that prevented us from ever reaching out for help or wanting help or thinking we deserve help and
Mm,
how we've gotten through it. And what I love is personal stories. I love hearing it from someone who has struggled and how they've gotten through it and what they learned along the way. Because, I mean, I love research books. I am the first one in line when Dr. Amen drops a new book. Don't get me wrong. I
oh, I love
love it.
Dr. Amen.
Right? Yes. Amazing. I love a good research book and I will sit there and read them all day. But it really hits different when you're hearing from someone who's gone through it and they're sharing very personally and vulnerably. It really makes all the difference.
Yeah, you mentioned Dr. Amen, and his book was so influential and impactful in my journey in recovering and working through recovery with depression. I read Change Your Brain, Change Your Life. And I remember reading a bunch of other of his books, but I was exposed to what he calls the ants. You remember that?
Yeah.
Automatic negative thoughts? Yeah. And ever since I learned about that, I have used that as a tool to identify the ants, to kill the ants, like he talks about, often, but recognizing that sometimes those thoughts that we have, although they're in our minds, they're not our thoughts, right? And there's something that we can do about them, especially if they're taking us off of the path to where we're trying to go. And I was so impacted that I actually write about killing the ants in my book, and I reference Dr. Amen. So I have the different steps on how to kill the ants and the importance of recognizing those cognitive distortions that so many struggle with.
That is, oh, I love that. I love how I randomly thought Dr. Amen. And I mean, he is so impactful, and learning those automatic negative thoughts, learning what we're thinking and how to understand it and combat it, right?
Mm-hmm.
We're not even taught how to reflect on what we're thinking and where it's coming from, which
No.
is crazy. I mean, I spent so many years in all these like verbal classes, right? In all these like reading comprehension and critical thinking, all these different classes. So many years, 12 years, maybe more. I don't know. And yet, I never learned how to reflect on what I was thinking and where it was coming from. I feel like that even could have helped me with SATs. I'm not gonna lie.
Yeah,
It probably
100%.
could have, right? But I genuinely despise that that's not a conversation we're taught when we're younger because it's such a useful tool. But I love that you're giving people that tool now.
Mm-hmm.
If we don't learn how to understand where our thoughts are coming from and why they're just these automatic negative thoughts, why we're thinking this way, why they're wrong, why
Mm-hmm.
they are wrong, why it's a lie, we can't move forward with giving ourselves love and self confidence and affirmations and telling ourselves the reasons we deserve support and help.
100%. And that's one of the reasons why I think it's so important to put this information out there. Because like you mentioned, I don't remember ever taking a class where we talked about thoughts, where we talked about affirmations, which is a really big thing that I love that you do in your journals and in your books, right? Because we don't learn that stuff. But how powerful is that for someone at a young age to understand that they can combat those thoughts and develop positive affirmations that help them to see themselves in a more accurate way, in a better way, and work towards having a better mindset and view on life. And I think it's so important. The work you're doing, the work that you're providing, and opportunities you're providing for youth, it's essential because where else are they going to get it? So 100%, I think it's necessary.
Yes, so necessary. I just think back to what it would have been like, right? If I was 8 years old and I could just tell myself that I'm enough, right? Those years in like elementary school where people are starting to bully, and then middle school where it gets really bad and very judgmental, and everyone's going through puberty and it's just this giant mess. If I was just able to tell myself that I'm enough, that I'm
Yeah.
not alone, that I'm loved, that these things I'm thinking about myself when I look in the mirror or when I see someone else or compare myself to someone else, or I'm scrolling on social media because that was, I think it was like seventh grade or eighth grade when Twitter was becoming a thing.
Yeah.
And, or at least when I was on Twitter, I remember making my original account. It was so exciting on the bus
I had
on the way to
MySpace.
school.
You remember MySpace?
I wasn't allowed to have MySpace. So
Okay.
I started my first social media was Kid Swirl. I feel like no one knows what that is. Do you know what it is?
No, I haven't heard of that one.
It's like the kid version of Facebook for parents who are really, really concerned about their kids being on
Oh,
social
wow.
media.
Yeah,
Rightfully so, as we see what it's become.
for sure.
However, in the midst of all of this insecurity developing, if I had just known an affirmation, I just understood what I was thinking and where it's coming from and how to combat it, everything could have been different. And you are making that difference for so many people, which is why I'm so grateful to know you and to have you on this podcast today. As we wrap up, can you give one piece of advice to someone who's struggling with these negative thoughts, with the stigma, who maybe just needs to hear some kind of motivation to let them know that it's okay to reach out?
Yeah, 100%. And I do want to thank you as well. I'm grateful for our friendship. I was able to have you on my podcast a while back, and just this conversation alone has been very invigorating for me. So I appreciate you. One thing that I would tell listeners is that suffering from depression or anxiety or any other mental illness, eating disorders, any of it, is not a sign of weakness. It's a sign that you are a human being going through a human experience, and you deserve to get the support that you need, and whatever you have to do to find that support, whatever hurdles you need to jump through to get that support, you're worth it. You deserve it, and I hope that you're able to find that.
I want to echo that. It is part of the human experience. It's okay not to be okay. You deserve help. You are worthy of help. Abraham, you've been absolutely amazing today and always. Thank you so much for joining me. Thank you so much for listening to Normalize the Conversation. Don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review. This podcast is an initiative of Inspiring My Generation, focusing on normalizing the conversation, bringing education and awareness to the forefront, and amplifying global voices to spark change and hope. Inspiring My Generation is a 501c3 nonprofit organization on a mission towards suicide prevention through awareness, conversation, education, and support. Connect with us on Instagram at Inspiring My Generation and visit our website inspiringmygeneration.org to learn more about our work and how you can make a difference.